Well, hello! And it's week 15 of the Condescending Evangelist. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the events that happened this week with a young Jewish couple. I think they were Messianic Jews for Jesus. That's what I've heard. I haven't been able to verify that, but it's kind of beside the point. They're Jewish, and the shooter was from Chicago. There's something about where I live. There's a problem. It's deep rooted. I think it's deep seated. After all, when was Chicago founded? I mean, when was Israel reestablished, if you will? 1948. I've talked about something that was going on at the same time in 1948. Well, I want to talk a little bit about, before I go into what happened, how I got into studying the Torah. Kind of go, why I started following Torah studies, basically. And this really started when I started looking at the Torah as I'm doing now. It started like 2018, 2019, somewhere in there. But the root of me getting into that started way much before that. Probably 2009, 2010 is when I was starting to really read the Old Testament again, because I was really more zeroed in on the New Testament. I would read the Psalms. I would read some of the prophets. But as far as and I would read some Genesis. I'd read some Exodus. I mean, I read the Bible cover to cover. But as far as studying it, as far as really looking at it, and I'm trying to understand what's actually trying to understand the whole entire biblical narrative. That really started in 2009, 2010 for me. I actually made a video called Prodigal Son. And it was basically, the whole video was about the whole concept of the video was going from the beginning, Genesis, to the very end in Revelation. I think I was realizing something that a lot of Christians didn't really understand. That the whole biblical narrative, there's a reason why it's actually put together that way. Because it is a revelation. The entire scriptures from Genesis to Revelation, it's all one story. It also contains pretty much all of human history. That's the revelation I think I really had. And therein lies what? When I talk about Bob Skiba, the Ephraim Awakening. And he talks about that starting around 2009, 2010. When I heard that, I was like, well, that's when I made that video. It's 2009, 2010. When I wrote the song, Prodigal Son is what I called it. And the whole concept of the Ephraim Awakening has to do with the prodigal son, the story of the prodigal son. That was the inspiration behind the video. Genesis to Revelation. And that whole Ephraim Awakening. So I was like, oh, I'm part of starting this, like it or not. I mean, God put it in my mind, in my heart, to start this, be part of starting this whole if you want to call it a revival, it is what it is. And so I bear a responsibility, therefore. Now, like I said, I was basically a lukewarm Christian. Going back to, let's see, as far as like, I think when I kind of fell asleep, if you will, probably was around 2000, not too soon, not too far after 9/11. Well, I don't know exactly when it happened, but I was always someone who understood salvation, the salvation message. But not much else, I guess. Maybe that was the point. Maybe I always was a lukewarm Christian, and I didn't realize it. Because all I really did understand was, that I needed to be saved. Maybe I didn't understand, and I understood why I needed to be saved. This is following the law. No one can do that. That's how you're taught. You're taught like it's impossible to follow the law. At the same time, you read that in the New Testament that God writes His law on your heart. That's the awakening. The real Ephraim Awakening is a recognition. It's like, well, it's not about being saved by the law. No, we're condemned by the law. However, we're saved by grace. And what the word grace really means. This is what the Lutherans, I think. See, I was involved in an organization that was founded by Lutherans. See, my dad went to a Lutheran elementary school. His dad was Lutheran. I think the Lutherans have missed out on what grace really means. Grace really means is the empowerment. We're given the power to carry out God's word, His law. Say, wait. So you were saved by works? No. It has to do with the fruits of the Spirit, ultimately. It's the evidence. It's how we know we're saved. This is the point. How do we really know we're saved? Well, Jesus died on the cross and blah, blah, blah. No. Yes, but you need to see the fruits, right? And you can talk about like, oh, look how many people I've led to the Lord. Yeah. You know what that kind of sounds like? What Jesus is saying on Judgment Day. Many will say, Lord, Lord, depart from me, I never knew you. Why? Fruits of the Spirit. Where are they? Love, joy, peace, kindness, gentleness, self-control. The most excellent way that Paul talks about. Love. Right? And he describes in the love chapter the fruits of the Spirit. The problem I see, many Christians, is it's in my family. Lack of mercy, but also on the flip side of that, well, the Torah portion gets into it. this week's Torah portion gets into it. Um, it's basically maybe lack of self-awareness is what it boils down to. And I think I had some of that, in all honesty. Which means if I would have died in my 30s, I don't know. That's why I talk about 2009, 2010. That was my probably actual true awakening. For real. And maybe that's why I've kind of reacted to family the way I have. Because I see them still asleep. Spiritually asleep. Spiritually dead. Some family. Because not willing to acknowledge maybe you're not right about everything. It's pride. And the same, that's pride. If you're not willing to acknowledge anything that you might not have done, no one's perfect. But if you come across that way, you're going to be subject to judgment. And so that's part of the issue, as I see it. So, talking about the Ephraim Awakening, like how I got into Torah, it really was something that occurred. It really, what triggered it may have been the NIU shooting for me. Because when that event happened, like I said, I was in Texas. I was in Dallas the day before. Grassy Knoll. I was shook up. More than most people. It was one of those moments where it was like kind of a 9/11 moment. And I was like, yeah, where was I when 9/11 happened? NIU. So it was like, oh, here we go again. That kind of, those thoughts I was having. Well, this week, no. Young Jewish couple gunned down by someone from Chicago. It's not surprising. Because Chicago is a cesspool of Marxism. Anti-Semitism. It is a cesspool of that. Regardless of what you think about the state of Israel. Regardless of what you think about the Jewish people. Is violence the answer? People say, well, they killed more about. Now, shut up. Is violence the answer? It's not the answer. Free Palestine. That's what the guy yelled as he was being arrested. Man, there's something not right between the ears. If that's what you think it's an act of war, basically, is what you kill the Jews, right? Hello, Nazism. Hello, fascism, which is a version of Marxism, socialism, communism. They're all under the same tree. Ultimately, Satanism. And so, that's why I think things have happened. Look, 1948. Something was going on in Chicago in 1948. I've talked about it at length. So it doesn't really bear much more, other than the fact that you know, Jesus said, learn the lesson of the fig tree. And so I've gone down all kinds of rabbit holes. Maybe that's the fig tree, ultimately. The point is, it gets back to what's really important. Okay, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the event. Let me just play. This is from NBC. Just play this clip. Let me see here. Can I speed it up? Doesn't look like I can speed it up. Okay, so I'm just going to play it.
The horror unfolded around 9 last night.
Response 1, active shooter 30, Africa 5 Street, Northwest.
A group of people leaving a young diplomat's reception at the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington when a gunman opened fire. 26-year-old Sarah Milgram and her partner, 30-year-old Yaron Lashinsky, both diplomatic staff at the Israeli embassy, were killed. Tonight, it's being investigated as a targeted terror attack.
The tragic murder of these two Israeli embassy employees outside of the Capitol Jewish Museum last night was both an act of terror and directed violence against the Jewish community. And it has the full and unwavering attention of the FBI.
The alleged gunman, 30-year-old Elias Rodriguez, shouted, "Free Palestine," as he was taken into police custody.
Free Palestine!
He's now facing multiple charges, including first-degree murder and murder of foreign officials. Today, the FBI is searching his Chicago apartment.
Violence against anyone based on their religion is an act of cowardice.
President Trump posting, "Hatred and radicalism have no place in the USA." Witnesses say it was a rainy night, and after firing the shots, the alleged gunman rushed into the museum.
And all of a sudden, we start hearing what sounds like gunshots.
The people inside had no idea what he had allegedly done and offered him a glass of water.
We're just thinking he's a witness, frazzled, and trying to comfort him.
When did you realize that he wasn't just a witness, that he was involved?
I would say it was about 10 minutes later when he started yelling to the entire museum, "I did it. Free Palestine, I did it for Gaza."
Tonight, Israel's prime minister speaking out.
The terrorists who cruelly gunned them down did so for one reason and one reason alone. He wanted to kill Jews. And as he was taken away, he chanted, "Free Palestine." This is exactly the same chant we heard on October 7th.
The attack comes amid an alarming rise in anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S., soaring nearly 900% in the last decade. Meanwhile, we're learning more about the two victims.
They're perfect children. No problems. And not too many parents can say that.
In 2017, Sarah Milgram spoke to our station in Kansas City when her high school was vandalized with anti-Semitic graffiti.
I worry about going to my synagogue, and I have to worry about safety at school, and that shouldn't be a thing.
Sarah's dad telling us he only found out last night that Yaron was going to propose.
Yaron had bought an engagement ring for Sarah and planned on giving it to her when they were in Jerusalem, about a week or two from now, which we did not know. So it was the best of times and the worst of times.
Aaron joining us now. Aaron, police were out there at the site of the shooting most of the day.
Mostly for security, Lester, as the investigation continues. We know they recovered a handgun and 21 spent shell casings here on the ground outside the museum. Meanwhile, there is a vigil tonight to remember the two victims. Lester?
Okay, Aaron, thank you. Let's bring in Tom Winter now in the investigation into the suspect. Tom, what have you learned?
Well, Lester, we have new details on the weapon tonight. Court documents allege Rodriguez bought the gun in Illinois in 2020 and brought it to D.C. in his checked luggage On Tuesday, the FBI is also investigating online writings, possibly from Rodriguez, saying he carried out this attack because of his views on the Israel-Hamas war. They're now combing through his phone and reaching out to his family. Meanwhile, officials in Washington say they're ramping up their police presence at public gatherings citywide. Here in New York, highly trained teams of heavily armored police are now deployed to many Jewish institutions. Lester?
All right.
Okay. So, you know, he was going to, I guess, propose during Shavuot, which is actually, I think the same as Pentecost. But I think the Jews, they observe it like a week before the Christians observe the Pentecost. Kind of interesting because it has to do with Easter. See, we gotta get it back. And for a Christian, you know, this is why I part of the reason I do what I'm doing. We gotta get Christians. Let's get back on God's calendar. The Jews, we can get back on God's calendar. We should abandon the whole mythos of, you know, there's something like this is going to happen, I think, eventually. Well, you know, like I said, if they're Messianic Jews, there's going to be a rise of more Messianic Jews as a result of this, I think. I think more Christians are going to decide to be like, you know what, I'm going to start following Torah. In solidarity with the Jews, in part. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that, as I see it. You know, it's like if you're doing it in a peaceful manner, blessed are the peacemakers, right? The issue becomes when it's like if you're too more overly, well, see, it's a delicate balance because Jesus says not one letter will be removed from the law until heaven and earth pass away. So, and yet there's no temple. So, spiritually speaking, I think it's true. Still, you know, I mean, I think there are spiritual applications to a lot of what's in the Torah. I think the Jews actually understand this too. I think they may understand this better. What they don't understand is the Messiah, but then you have the Messianic Jews. Well, they do understand this. They do have the Torah. This gets back to what I've been saying about the Ephraim Awakening. We may need to really examine a lot of this more. Because things like this just don't happen out of the blue. I'm sorry. There's a reason behind this. And you know, blessed are the peacemakers. And this person that gunned down this couple from Chicago, yeah, he's full of hate. And this is why, you know, I don't know what this really means for me, in all honesty, because, you know, I started this channel with the purpose. Well, it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but, you know, at the same time, I think God is calling me the condescending evangelist. I think that's what's happened. I think, obviously, this event, it's what happens the day before the anniversary of NIU, by the way. The 130th anniversary was yesterday. Like I said, the shooter was from Chicago. think it's just a coincidence. I mean, I haven't looked enough. Who knows? Did he go to NIU? Did he go to university, a public university in the Chicago area? Did he? Did he go to UIC? Did he go to Chicago State? Probably not. But yeah, I'm thinking that there's a spiritual significance here. I'm not making this about myself, but it's like I started this channel in part. It was inspired by a song, an epic song that I written, but I mean that was inspired by other events that happened in the fall 2021, which was when October 7th, 2021 happened. 2 years later, or actually it was, no, I got that wrong. October 7th, 2021 was when Biden was in Elk Grove Village. 2 years later was when Israel was attacked. And so that's why I've been doing what I've been doing, because, well, like I said, this goes back to, for me, the NIU shooting. I was in Texas. And it was like, this is, the day before I was in the JFK. It's like, there's something. It's like I was at NIU when 9/11 happened. It was the Speaker of the House. It was Dennis Hastert, who went to NIU. And so, the president, of course, was George W. Bush. Where was he from? Where was he before he was president? Governor of Texas, Austin. Where was I on the day of the NIU shooting? Austin, Texas. So there's some sort of things. There's some sort of spiritual thing. It's a spiritual. Our battle's not against flesh and blood. It's against principalities, wicked spirits in high places, powers of darkness. But these things are manifesting in our reality, I think. That's what I see going on. I'm seeing the manifestation of the spiritual war happening in reality. This is why I'm the condescending evangelist. Because it's not about what's this manifestation of spiritual war. That's not what it's about. It's about how do we fight this message of the cross. Because the enemy cannot win when we have our spiritual armor on. Helmet of salvation. Breastplate of righteousness. Shield of faith. Belt of truth. Middle of truth. That's where I got the idea of, people want to know where I got the idea for middle of truth. That's really where I got, that's the belt of truth. That's where I got the idea. Feet of readiness to present the good news. The sword of the Spirit. Put on the full armor of God. That is the message of the cross. That is what saves us. Because the world, putting on the armor of God, is foolishness. But it is the power of God. Those of us who know those of us who are being saved, we know it's the power of God, message of the cross, and it is a spiritual war. But I see it manifesting. I'm just telling you, I can see it, and that's why I'm the condescending evangelist, because I can see it manifesting. I'm saying, put it on your spiritual armor. That's what needs to happen. The church needs to, it's not about waking up as much as it's just, let me just go to the Torah section. Let me just go to that right now. This week's Torah portion we're still in Leviticus. And it's Emor. Yeah, it's Emor. And it's the scriptures for this week's study. Leviticus 21 to 24. 1 Samuel 15, 2 to 34. Ezekiel 44, 15 to 31. Zechariah 14, 16 to 21. And Malachi, when I listened to it, Malachi, it wasn't the entire book of Malachi. It was like the Malachi chapter 1. Might have been Malachi chapter 1 and 2. Then the New Testament portion is Matthew 25, 1 to 13, Mark 2, 20 to Mark chapter 2, verse 20 to chapter 3, verse 5, Luke 12, 1 to 59, Acts 20, 6 to 16, Romans 11, 11 to 36, 1 Corinthians 5, 1 to 8, Galatians 3, 23 to 29, Ephesians chapter 2, Ephesians chapter 5, 25 to 27, 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 to 11, 1 Peter 2, 1 to 10, 2 Peter 3, 13 to 18, and Revelation 21. Now, I think I want to go to 1 Samuel. Where is it? What's the scripture? Okay, this is what I want to get to. Okay, let's start with verse 17. This is chapter 15, verse 17. I'll just start reading. And Samuel said, when thou wast little in thine own sight, Wast thou not made the head of the tribes of Israel? And the Lord anointed thee over Israel. And the Lord sent thee on a journey and said, Go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they be consumed. Wherefore then didst thou not obey the voice of the Lord, but didst fly upon the spoil, and didst evil in the sight of the Lord? And Saul said unto Samuel, Yea, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord, and have gone the way which the Lord sent me, and have brought Agag, the king of Amalek, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took of the spoil sheep and oxen, the chief of the things which should have been utterly destroyed, to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God in Gilgal. And Samuel said, Hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity in idolatry. Because thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, he hath also rejected thee from being king. Saul, what he did was, God said to utterly destroy the Amalekites and all their, take no spoils of war, basically. Utterly destroy the Amalekites and everything they own. And Saul decided to destroy the Amalekites, but take the spoils. And then Samuel's telling him that, yeah, you're doing it your way, not God's way. You're not being obedient. And it's rebellion. To not do it God's way is to rebel. And it's equal to witchcraft. And so what do you got going on with the shooter? Well, it's clear rebellion. That's what it is. It's clear rebellion because in his heart and mind, he's doing what he thinks is justice. Because free Palestine, right? No. That's not justice. That's your version of justice. And so it's rebellion. It's a form of witchcraft. Gets into some of what I was dealing with also with well, I myself got caught up in some of the witchcraft that I was investigating. It's hard because I see a lot of witchcraft coming from mainstream media. People don't even understand what witchcraft is. It is a form of rebellion. That's what's at the it's what's at the root of. I read a book. My mom gave it to me. It was eye-opening. Because I was like, yeah, I think my whole life was witchcraft. That's really what inspired me to write the album. Partly was what I was observing in the fall of 2021. And then I thought about some of the other stuff in my own life. I was like, yeah, it's all witchcraft. And I was part of it. I didn't realize it. I didn't understand it. And so when I was working on an album, and back in 2009, 2010, I knew something was going on. I didn't understand it, but I knew something was happening. Well, I found Rob Skiba's work. I'm like, and he talked about the Ephraim Awakening. He said he noticed it around 2009, 2010. I'm like, oh, I'm part of that. You know, I'm not saying I started it, but I'm saying I'm definitely part of it. In part because I was rebelling. That's just what it is. I was in rebellion mode. I didn't understand it totally. I knew I was rebelling on some level, but I didn't understand how depraved I was. And too many people, I think, don't recognize their own depravity. It's witchcraft at the end of the day. It's idolatry. Stubbornness. The unwillingness to is as iniquity and idolatry. Well, stubbornness is the unwillingness to admit your own fault. It's tied to pride. I'm dealing with some of that in my own family. They're stubborn. Look, I myself can be stubborn. I know this. I get it from my dad. But it's like, you know, the problem that I see is people are just not willing to swallow their pride. That's the oldest sin, and that's part of the original sin. I was listening to James O'Keefe. He was on Charlie Kirk's show, and he mentioned some of what's going on in his company, Project Veritas, was tied to the original sin. Well, pettiness. He talked about pettiness. Well, yeah, it's pride, stubbornness. That's what it is. Just unwillingness to recognize your own fault. Let me tell you. I mean, I definitely know I'm wrong in a lot of areas. But man, I'm telling you, people I've dealt with, they ain't willing to. They refuse to acknowledge stuff. I'm like, I don't know what to do with that. Honestly, that's why I do what I do here. Because I'm trying to, like, in some way, shape, or form, trying to break through those people that, from my past. Some of you, this is why I'm the condescending evangelist, quite frankly. Because some of you are just unwilling to admit anything that you've done is wrong. Some of you, I don't know, I know where that's coming from, quite frankly. Pride. That's where it's coming from. Like I said, I can tell you this. I was in rebellion mode. But if what I did, like, I'll point to, like, we just had Mother's Day. stubbornness can work in a way that you don't really think it might work. Where you don't even realize you're stubborn. You can be stubborn and not realize it, I guess is the best way to say it. You know, if you have a problem with someone, for example, you deal with them head on, one-on-one. If you have a problem with someone, you know, I'm mentioning Mother's Day because I know there's someone that has a problem with me. But they don't know how to deal with it head on head, one-on-one, head on head. They just don't know how to do it right. I don't know how else to say it. There's a fear factor. But I think it's rebellion. I think it's connected to rebellion because I think this person is still dealing with something that happened. Doesn't know how to deal with it properly. And so there's this thing called transference. That's what I think is in part going on. Or what may have happened, but still, I think another thing that could have happened is politics. Maybe this person got caught up in politics when they never really were, but they were influenced. Well, again, this goes to the word pride, stubbornness. If you're upset because you started going down a pathway politically because you were influenced by someone, I think this could be part of what happened. Well, you shouldn't be upset at the person that may have influenced you. You should look in your own heart and say, maybe I didn't. Maybe I just didn't understand something. I don't always get everything right. But, I go by. I was going by a lot of. Media. That's why you can't depend on the media. I learned this. I had to learn this the hard way. No, I'm the same. You can't go by what the media says. Too many people do that. I partly was doing that. But I realized, I can't do that. Because the media can lie. And so, maybe that's what was going on. But I don't know, because it seemed like this individual is unforgiving. And maybe that's where it gets back to something else that occurred. Transference. Look into that. You can't. If you may have like a lot of knowledge when it comes to early childhood development. Let me tell you something. You missed the boat on that too, because my own mother. I've talked about this regardless of my own mother. Something that happened. Really, my parents, they're kind of old school, but they're like neo old school, because you don't worry about like keep things hidden from the kids. That kind of nonsense, because reason that's nonsense is because, if someone's having a problem and they don't really know why, what's the real cause of it, and then you learn something, it's like, oh, that's probably why I'm this way. That's why, you study early childhood development, that don't mean nothing unless you have certain facts. That might have been the issue at hand, But see, something happened to me that was worse than what went on Mother's Day 2012. But then, if you didn't deal with something that happened before that Mother's Day 2012, if you didn't handle that situation, stubbornness can come back and you know what. And, the other form of stubbornness would be giving your son a book to read and then you not read it when your son is telling you to read it. And hand it off too, by the way, because it needs to be read by someone else. That's another form of stubbornness that exists in my family. It's rebellion. It's witchcraft. Oh, the irony. Anyways, Shabbat Shalom.
Goodbye, Toledo.